On the morning of her birthday, Lucy's mother woke her up and told her a package had arrived in the mail, and it was addressed to her. The girl hurried up and unwrapped the package and was horrified at what she found inside. It was the most disgusting old doll she had ever seen. It was completely bald, and its skin was cracked and caked in dirt. The worst thing of all was its teeth. They were long, pointy, sharp, and beastly. They looked like some sort of animal's fangs. With a shiver, she took the doll and threw it in a corner. Her mother scolded her, telling her that someone had gone through a lot of trouble to send her that antique doll. Her mother told her she had better appreciate it. Lucy tried to protest, but her mother would not listen. She forced the young girl to keep the doll. So, to put her mind at rest, Lucy stuffed the antique doll into the little cupboard under the stairs, behind the pile of shoes where she wouldn't have to look at the ugly, evil little thing. It was not until a few nights later, when Lucy was laying in bed and she heard a noise, a shuffling sound, which went on for about 5 minutes. Then a brief dragging noise, and finally a scuttling like footsteps walking very fast. By now Lucy was shaking her head in bed with fear, unable to move. Then she thought she heard a faint, raspy voice whispering quietly from downstairs. Lucy always slept with the door open and the landing light on, as she was a little scared of the dark. She heard the voice say, "Lucy, I'm on the first step," and then a loud, scrabbling noise again, as whatever was speaking apparently turned tail and returned to its place of hiding. Lucy was so scared that she didn't sleep a wink that night, but laid in fear until the break of dawn, when her mother got her up for school. Lucy tried to explain to her mother what had happened the night before, but she was so tired that when her mother passed it off as just a dream. She began to believe it might be the case, but of course it wasn't. Lucy had begged her parents to let her throw the antique doll in the garbage, but insisted that it was a present and that she had to keep it. So Lucy reluctantly went back to bed, telling herself that it had only been a dream. She checked the cupboard under the stairs, but the doll was exactly where Lucy had left her that night. Lucy fought sleep, but she eventually drifted off, even though she had fought to stay awake. Presently, the deep, disembodied voice woke her up again. She wondered if she could only hear it in her head. "Lucy, I'm on the 4th step," it said. Then came the scuffling noises, and the voice didn't reoccur that night. Lucy was crying by now, and again, she didn't sleep that night. At school, Lucy told her friends about the doll, and of course they laughed at her. Lucy could only think that if the doll was climbing 4 steps at a time, that there was only one more night to go. That night, Lucy decided to shut her bedroom door. When her mother turned out her light, she asked why Lucy was no longer scared of the dark. Lucy replied that she was, and could she leave her light on instead of the hall light. But her mother pointed out that her bedroom light was so bright that it would keep her awake, and she said no. Therefore, Lucy agreed to just sleep without a light. She opened the bedroom curtains instead to light the room a little anyway. Just as she began to doze, she heard the noise, and the voice came. Very, very clear this time. "Lucy, I'm on the top step." In the darkness of her bedroom, Lucy heard a click and trembled with fear. She wasn't sure, but she thought she could see her bedroom door opening very, very slowly. The next morning, Lucy's parents found her body at the bottom of the stairs. They guessed that she had been on her way to the toilet during the night, and in the darkness slipped and fallen down the stairs, breaking her neck. The antique doll was found beside her body and was buried with Lucy. Everyone said what a tragedy it was. "She loved that doll," said her mother. "Now they can be together forever." There was
were two 15-year-old girls named Alice and Sarah who had been best friends since early childhood. They lived in the same neighborhood, attended the same school, and went to the same classes. In short, they were inseparable. However, they were very different characters. When Alice was cheerful and outgoing, Sarah was very shy and quiet. One day, Sarah and Alice were talking about their friendship. "Do you think we'll be best friends forever?" asked Alice. "I think so," replied Sarah. "Why wouldn't we?" "I don't know," said Alice. "Sometimes when people get older, they grow apart." "I have an idea," said Sarah. "Let's take a blood oath." "A what?" asked Alice, surprised. "A blood oath," said Sarah. "Look, we both have to swear that we'll be best friends forever. If we ever lose touch, we both swear that we will do everything we can to make sure we will be together forever." "That's nonsense, Sarah," said Alice. "We won't lose touch. We'll always be together." But Sarah continued to insist, and with a mixture of amazement and amusement, Alice finally agreed to the proposal. Sarah found 2 needles and handed one to Alice. The girls took a piece of paper and wrote "Best Friends Forever" on the top, and then signed their names at the bottom. They lit a candle and heated the tips of the 2 needles in the flame. Taking their needles, both girls pricked their index fingers, and each smeared a drop of blood next to their signature. Their blood oath was now sealed. As the years passed, the girls grew up and left school. Alice went away to college in another city, while Sarah stayed in their hometown and got a job in a local store. Both of them had boyfriends and fell in love. The girls still kept in touch by phone, calling each other at least once a week. When Alice had completed her law degree, she got a good job and decided that it was time to get married. The couple bought a house and settled down. A few years later, they had a beautiful baby boy. Alice was so busy with her family that she rarely found time to call Sarah. It wasn't long before the phone call stopped completely and the friends lost touch with each other. Although Alice would sometimes still think about her best friend from her youth, she never took the trouble to pick up the phone and call her. In the end, life had led the 2 women down different paths, and they had not seen each other since they left school. One night, Alice had a horrible nightmare. She was driving along an endless highway when suddenly a truck in front of her began to swerve into her lane. The truck skidded and then collided with her car. She woke up suddenly, soaked in sweat. Just as she was trying to calm herself down, she heard her front doorbell ringing. She glanced at the clock by her bedside and realized it was after 3 a.m. Her husband was fast asleep on the other side of the bed. At that moment, the doorbell rang again, insistently. Wondering who could be coming to visit at that time of night, Alice got up, threw on her nightgown, and went downstairs. When she opened the front door, she was shocked to see a woman standing on the porch. The woman was terribly pale, extremely haggard, and had a huge bleeding wound on her forehead. Although she had changed a lot, Alice recognized her immediately. It was her old friend Sarah. "Oh my God, Sarah, what happened?" she cried. Sarah just stared at her. "Come in, out of the rain," said Alice. "Are you hurt?" Sarah didn't move from where she was. "What's wrong, Sarah?" pleaded Alice. "Long time no see, Alice," hissed Sarah. "I've come to fulfill my promise. I've come to tell you I died." Alice was speechless. Sarah held up her hand and pointed at Alice with her index finger. Her finger was dripping blood. "Life has separated us," Sarah continued, "but we will be together in death. I'll be waiting." Alice then fainted and collapsed on the ground. The next morning, when Alice woke up, she found that she was laying in bed next to her husband. She rubbed her eyes and wondered if the events of last night had all been just a bad dream. At breakfast, she turned on the television, and what she saw chilled her to the bone. The local newscaster was saying that the night before, right around 3 a.m., there had been a fatal traffic accident. A truck had collided with a car on the highway. The driver of the car had been killed on impact. The driver of the car was a woman named Sarah. From that moment on, Alice's life became a living hell. She barely ate a thing. She she forgot to pick up her child from school, and when she went to work, she couldn't concentrate on anything. Every night she had the same terrible dream. She would awake to the sound of the front door bell ringing. She would open the door and find Sarah standing there, her bloody index finger pointing straight at Alice. Each time Sarah would say the same thing, "I'll be waiting." Each morning Alice awoke in a cold sweat. She looked down at her bed sheets, and they would be streaked with blood. She felt an excruciating pain in her finger, and when she looked, her finger was covered in blood. Her husband did not understand what was happening. He took his wife to see a doctor and a psychiatrist, but neither of them could find any explanation. Alice's condition only grew worse, and in her nightmares she began seeing Sarah standing at her bedside, pointing with her bleeding finger. One night, the husband was awakened by a dreadful noise. It was the sound of breaking glass. He ran out to the bathroom and discovered that the window was broken. Peering outside, he saw Alice lying on the sidewalk, her limbs askew. The horrified man rushed downstairs and out the front door. There was a pool of blood around his wife's head. Beside her on the pavement, someone had written in her blood, "Friends forever."
It has been said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. I understand the sentiment behind the saying, but it's wrong. I entered the building on a bet. I was strapped for cash, and I didn't buy into any of the old legends of the hotel to begin with. So $50 was more than enough to get me to do it. It was simple. Just reach the top floor, the 45th floor, shine my flashlight from a window, and that $50 would be mine. The hotel was old and it was broken, including the elevator, so that meant hiking up the stairs. So up the stairs I went. As I reached each platform, I noted the old brass plaques displaying the floor numbers: 15, 16, 17, 18. I felt a little tired as I crept higher, but so far so good. No ghosts, no cannibals, no demons, no poltergeists, nothing at all, just some crumbling walls and some dirty floors. It was a piece of cake. I can't tell you how happy I was as I entered that last stretch of numbers. I joyfully counted them aloud at each platform. 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 44. I stopped for a moment and looked back down the stairs. I must have miscounted somewhere. So I continued up. 44. One more flight. 44. And then back down 10 flights. 44. 15 flights. 44. And so it's been for as long as I can remember. So really, insanity isn't doing something repeatedly and expecting different results. It's knowing that the results will never, ever change. That each door leads to the same staircase, to the same number. It's realizing you will no longer fall asleep. It's not knowing whether you've been running for days, or weeks, or even years. It's when the sobbing slowly turns into laughter. One night, a father and his daughter were driving down a deserted country road. They were returning home after spending the entire day visiting the girl's mother in hospital. Listening to the sound of the rain drumming on the car roof, the girl began to doze off. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. The father struggled with the steering wheel, but the car skidded off the wet road and slammed into a stone wall. After checking that his daughter was uninjured, the man got out of the car to survey the damage. Both of the front tires had been punctured, and the right fender was crumpled up against the wall. The rest of the car had survived unscathed. "We must have driven over something on the road," he explained to his daughter. "Whatever it was, it blew out both of the tires." "Well, you can fix it, right?" asked his daughter, somewhat shaken by the accident. "Well, no, not really," replied her father, shaking his head. "I've only got one spare tire in the trunk. I'll have to walk back into town and find someone to tow the car," he said. "It really isn't that far from here. You can wait in the car while I'm gone." "Well, okay," she said reluctantly, "but please don't take too long." The man could see in his daughter's eyes that she was frightened. "Sit tight," replied the father as he closed the car door. "I'll be back as soon as possible." His daughter watched him in the rearview mirror as he trudged off down the road in the pouring rain and disappeared into the night. More than an hour had passed, and her father still hadn't returned. The girl began to wonder what was taking him so long. She was very worried because he should have been back by now. Just then, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure in the distance, walking towards the car. At first, she thought it was her father, but when she turned to take a closer look, she realized that it was a strange man. He was dressed in overalls and had a big bushy beard. He was carrying something large in his left hand, swinging it back and forth. Something about this man made her very, very nervous. As he approached, she stared out the back window and squinted her eyes. In the dim light, she could just make out what he was clutching in his right hand. It was a big, sharp butcher's knife. Thinking quickly, the terrified girl locked both doors in the front of the car, then jumped into the back seat and locked the rear doors. When she looked up again, she saw that the strange man had stopped in his tracks and seemed to be staring directly at her. Suddenly, the man raised his arm in the air, and the girl let out a blood-curdling scream. In his left hand, he was clutching her father's severed head. She just kept screaming and screaming. She couldn't stop herself. Her heart was pounding, and she was struggling to breathe. The grotesque expression on their father's face was horrifying to behold. His mouth was hanging open, and his eyes were rolled back in his head. When the man reached the car, he shoved his face right up against the window and glowered at her with his crazed, bloodshot eyes. His hair was wild and matted with dirt. His face was covered in deep scars. For a moment, he just stood there in the driving rain, grinning at her like a madman. Then, he reached into his pocket, took something out, and slowly lifted his hand. He was holding her father's car keys.
I grew up in a small town and lived out in the country. My mom and I were coming home from Walmart really late one night and decided to take the back way home. I still had my learner's permit, so I wanted to take a road with less traffic. Anyone who has ever lived or been to the country knows how creepy these roads can be at night. I was going around a curve right before a one-lane bridge, so I slowed down in case I had to stop. Out of nowhere, this woman jumps out in front of me to the driver's side of my car and starts pounding on the hood of my car. Her mouth was moving, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. My mom started freaking out and told me not to stop and just keep driving. I kept going, and we both looked back to see where she was, and no one was there. To this day, my mom and I still remember it clearly. Turns out there's apparently a legend about a woman who died around the bridge, and supposedly can be seen sometimes late at night. I get goosebumps to this day just thinking about it.
If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you'd like to, you can follow me at Twitter. The handle is @FuzzyPantaloons, and I'll see you all next time.